My husband's family left for a tropical vacation, while I was on mandatory bed rest for a high-risk pregnancy, flooding social media with pictures while I was completely alone. They thought their cruelty would be forgotten, but they didn't count on my quiet neighbor's doorbell camera, which gave me the perfect, time-stamped evidence to expose their neglect. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in the house was the first thing that truly terrified me. It wasn't the peaceful, comforting quiet of a lazy Sunday afternoon. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of soundlessness that pressed down on me from all sides. For the past 3 days, since the doctor's final, non-negotiable verdict, that silence had been my only constant companion. "Strict bed rest, Teresa," Dr. Evans had said, her voice gentle but firm. "Not take it easy rest. I mean you get up only for the bathroom. No exceptions. The baby's health depends on it." Lying on the propped-up pillows of our guest bed, which we'd moved into the living room to spare me the stairs, I stared at the ceiling. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of this room. My body, once a source of strength and creative energy, now felt like a fragile, unpredictable vessel I could no longer trust. Every twinge, every flutter sent a jolt of panic through me. At 32, I had imagined pregnancy as a joyful, bustling time filled with decorating a nursery and celebrating with loved ones. I never imagined it would be this. A state of suspended animation, trapped in a horizontal prison of my own anatomy. My husband, David, was wonderful, but his work as a civil engineer often kept him on site until late in the evening. He would leave before sunrise, his face etched with worry, and return after dark, exhausted but always bringing me a small treat or a new magazine. His concern was a small warmth in the vast coldness of my days, but it couldn't fill the endless hours of solitude. My in-laws were supposed to be my safety net. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, and Susan, my sister-in-law, lived only 15 minutes away. When I first got the news, I cried on the phone to Eleanor, explaining the doctor's orders. "Oh, darling, don't you worry about a thing," she had cooed, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "Susan and I will be your little support squad. We'll bring you meals, keep you company. You won't have to lift a finger." The relief that washed over me was immense. I had always had a slightly strained relationship with them. Eleanor was the type of woman who maintained a pristine home and an equally pristine public image, and she often made subtle comments about my more artistic, freelance lifestyle. Susan, ever her mother's echo, followed suit, but I believed that in a crisis, family would be family. They had promised. That belief shattered 3 days ago. I was scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from a wave of nausea, when a picture popped up on my social media feed. It was Susan, grinning from ear to ear, wearing oversized sunglasses and a floppy sun hat. Behind her was a stretch of impossibly white sand and turquoise water. The caption read, "Paradise found, time for some much-needed vitamin C, family getaway island life." My breath caught in my throat. I clicked on her profile. There it was, a photo of Eleanor, Susan, and David's father, all raising colorful drinks in a toast. The location tag confirmed it, a luxury resort in the Caribbean. The vacation they had been planning for months, the one I assumed they would postpone. The one Eleanor had specifically told me not to worry about because family comes first. I frantically called Eleanor's phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried Susan. The same. I sent a text, my thumbs trembling so much I could barely type. "Saw your pictures. I thought you were staying to help me." Hours passed. The silence in the house grew louder, mocking me. Finally, a text from Susan buzzed on the nightstand. I snatched it up, my heart pounding with a desperate hope that this was all a misunderstanding. "Hey, so sorry, reception is spotty. Mom said you'd be fine. David's there at night, right? We just really needed this break. You know how stressful planning this trip was. TTYL." The casual cruelty of it knocked the air from my lungs. Stressful planning this trip. As if that compared to the stress of potentially losing my baby. They hadn't just left. They had dismissed me. My condition, my fear, my utter dependency, it was an inconvenience to be brushed aside for cocktails on a beach. I dropped the phone and wrapped my arms around my stomach, a protective gesture that felt painfully inadequate. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry since the diagnosis began to stream down my face, hot and furious. It wasn't just the loneliness or the fear for my unborn child. It was the profound, soul-crushing sting of abandonment by the very people who had looked me in the eye and promised to care for me. The betrayal was a physical ache, sharper and more debilitating than any pregnancy symptom I had endured. It settled deep in my chest, a cold, heavy stone of realization. I was completely and utterly alone. The sickness of their betrayal was worse than the sickness in my body. The first week after their departure was a blur of gray monotony and gnawing anxiety. Each day melted into the next, distinguished only by the shifting patterns of sunlight on the living room wall. I tried to lose myself in books, but the words swam before my eyes. I tried to watch movies, but the cheerful plots felt like a personal insult. My world was the bed, the television, and the suffocating weight of my own thoughts. David was a rock, but a rock being worn down by the tide. He'd come home each night to find me either staring blankly at the ceiling or silently crying. He would hold me, his big, capable hands feeling so gentle against my back, and murmur apologies for not being there more, for his family's unbelievable callousness. "I called Mom again, Teresa," he told me one night, his voice tight with frustration. "She answered this time, said I was being dramatic and that you needed to stop trying to guilt-trip them. She said a little quiet time would be good for you." "Quiet time?" I whispered, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. "David, I haven't spoken to another human being face-to-face since you left for work this morning." His face crumpled. "I know, I'm so sorry. I can take a few days off. I'll tell my boss it's an emergency." "No," I said, forcing a strength I didn't feel. "You can't risk your job. We need it now more than ever." We both knew it was true. My freelance income had vanished the moment the doctor said bed rest, and the mounting medical bills were a constant, unspoken stressor. The isolation began to feel like a physical presence in the room. I'd have long, one-sided conversations with the baby, my hand resting on my belly, telling her about my day as if she could hear and understand. It was a comfort, but a fragile one. The silence that answered me back was always a stark reminder of my solitude. One afternoon, I was staring out the large picture window that overlooked our front yard when I saw my next-door neighbor, Margaret, tending to her rose bushes. She was a kind, grandmotherly woman of 68, a retired nurse who had lived on our street for decades. We had always been friendly, exchanging pleasantries over the fence, but we weren't close. She straightened up, wiping her brow with the back of a gardening glove, and her eyes met mine through the glass. I gave a weak, small wave. She smiled warmly and waved back before turning back to her flowers. About an hour later, the doorbell chimed. My heart leaped, then sank. It couldn't be David, it was too early. It certainly wasn't his family. Panic began to prickle at my skin. I was helpless, unable to even get up to see who was there. I reached for my phone, ready to text David, when it chimed again with a notification from our security app. A motion alert from the front door. I tapped it open and a live feed appeared. It was Margaret, standing on our porch, holding a covered casserole dish. She looked into the camera, smiled gently, and then set the dish down on the welcome mat. She gave another small wave toward the lens before turning and walking back to her own house. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Teresa, dear, it's Margaret from next door. David mentioned your situation when I saw him last week. I left a chicken and rice casserole on your porch. No need to return the dish. Hope you enjoy." Tears filled my eyes, but these were different from the hot tears of betrayal. These were tears of pure, unadulterated gratitude. This near stranger had shown me more compassion in a single gesture than my own family had in a week. When David got home, he found me eating directly from the dish, and he smiled for the first time all day. "That's Margaret," he said. "She's the best." This became our new routine. Every day around lunchtime, my phone would buzz with a motion alert. I would open the app and see Margaret on the porch, leaving a container of soup, a slice of freshly baked bread, or a plate of sandwiches. She never rang the bell twice or tried to intrude. She would just leave her offering, wave at the camera, and go. Her silent, steadfast kindness was a beacon in the lonely expanse of my days. As the second week of my family's paradise trip began, their social media presence only grew more obnoxious. There was Susan, snorkeling with sea turtles. There was Alina, getting a massage by the pool. The captions were full of hashtags like unbothered and living our best life. Each post felt like a deliberate twist of the knife. They knew I would see them. They knew I was trapped and alone, and they were flaunting their freedom. One night, as I was looking at a picture of Alina and Susan laughing over a plate of tropical fruit, a cold, quiet thought surfaced in my mind, cutting through the fog of hurt and self-pity. They were acting as if I didn't exist, as if their responsibilities and promises had vanished into thin air. They were counting on me being too weak, too emotional, too overwhelmed to hold them accountable. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that evidence, in the modern world, was everywhere. And while they were creating a public record of their carefree abandonment, a different, much more powerful record was being compiled just a few feet from my front door. Before I met David, my life had been a testament to self-reliance. My own mother had passed away when I was in college, and my father, a quiet man broken by his grief, was never quite the same. I learned early on that if I wanted something, I had to build it myself. I worked my way through design school, waitressing at night and studying during the day. I launched my freelance graphic design business from a tiny apartment with a second-hand laptop and a mountain of ambition. Every client, every success, was earned through sheer determination. I was proud of the life I had built, a life of independence and creative control. Then David came along, with his steady, gentle presence and his deep love for his family. In the beginning, I was charmed by their closeness. Alina, his mother, was the undisputed matriarch. She was impeccably dressed, her home looked like a magazine spread, and she managed her family with an iron will disguised in velvet. She loved to host elaborate dinners where she would hold court, telling stories that always seemed to circle back to her own sacrifices and successes. When David and I first got serious, she took me to lunch, a sort of formal vetting process. "David is a good boy," she'd said, stirring her iced tea with a perfectly manicured finger. "He's always been sensitive. He needs a partner who is stable, grounded." The unspoken implication was clear. My freelance, artistic life was seen as flighty, unreliable. I was not quite up to her standards. I tried hard to win her over. I brought thoughtful gifts, praised her cooking, and listened attentively to her endless stories about the family's history. I thought I was making progress. When we announced our engagement, she seemed genuinely happy, throwing us a party where she told everyone I was the daughter she never had. Looking back, I realize it was all part of the performance. My role was to be the adoring, compliant daughter-in-law who would slot neatly into the family portrait she had so carefully curated. Susan, David's younger sister, was her mother's loyal disciple. She had a job in marketing that seemed to mostly involve posting on social media, and she emulated Alina in every way, from her taste in clothes to her subtly critical tone. If Alina made a pointed comment about my eclectic home decor, Susan would chime in with, "Oh, Mom's right, a little minimalism would really open this space up." They were a united front, a pair of polished judges evaluating my every move. Their disapproval became more pronounced when I became pregnant. Alina had strong opinions on everything. She sent me articles on old-fashioned parenting methods, questioned my choice of doctor, and insisted that my morning sickness was mostly in my head. When the pregnancy was deemed high risk, her skepticism was palpable. "High risk," she'd said over the phone, a dismissive scoff in her voice. "Teresa, women have been having babies for thousands of years without all this modern fuss." My mother worked in the garden until the day I was born. She saw my diagnosis not as a medical crisis, but as a personal failing, a dramatic indulgence. And the bed rest was the ultimate inconvenience, a disruption to her world. The vacation had been planned for nearly a year, a grand celebration for her husband's retirement. My complications were a threat to her perfectly laid plans. That's when the promises started, the sweet, syrupy assurances designed to placate me so she could get what she wanted. "We'll be here for you, darling," she'd said, her voice full of false sincerity. "Don't you even think about this trip. Your health is what's important." It was a classic Alina move. Create the illusion of selfless support while ensuring her own desires were never compromised. Now, lying in bed, scrolling through the images of their sun-drenched holiday, I could see the pattern with sickening clarity. The smiling selfies, the photos of them on a catamaran, the video of Susan learning to salsa at a beachside bar, it was all a performance. They weren't just on vacation, they were broadcasting a message. The message was that they were free, unburdened. They were a happy, perfect family, and my crisis had no place in their narrative. Susan's captions were particularly galling. "No drama, just good vibes," she wrote under a picture of a sunset. It was a direct, calculated jab. My loneliness began to curdle into a cold, hard anger. My sacrifices for this family, the effort I had poured into gaining their approval, had meant nothing. I had been a prop, and now that I was a broken prop, I had been cast aside. One afternoon, Margaret from next door left a thermos of her famous tomato soup and a small stack of magazines. In the text she sent afterward, she added, "P.S. I noticed your mail has been piling up. I gathered it for you and left it in the parcel box on the porch. Don't you worry about a thing." Her simple, unassuming kindness was a stark contrast to the performative cruelty of my in-laws. Margaret wasn't family by blood, but she was acting more like a mother to me than a leaner ever had. She expected nothing in return. Her actions weren't for an audience, they were born of genuine compassion. Staring at the photo of Alina raising a glass of champagne, her face a mask of carefree joy, I felt the last vestiges of my hope for her affection wither and die. She wasn't just neglectful, she was malicious. This vacation was her way of putting me in my place, of punishing me for being inconvenient. She was the polished, smiling antagonist of my story, and her weapon of choice was a crushing, deliberate indifference. The turning point came on a Tuesday. It was day 10 of the vacation, day 10 of my isolation. David had called during his lunch break, his voice strained. "Susan posted a video," he said, skipping any preamble. "It's a tour of their hotel suite. She pans across the whole family and Dad makes a toast to no stress and no drama." I closed my eyes. I saw it. "I'm going to call them and let them have it," David said, his voice rising in anger. "This is unacceptable. I'm done being patient." "No," I said, a sudden surprising calm washing over me. Don't say anything. Let them keep thinking we're just sitting here, hurt and helpless." "Teresa, what are you talking about? We are hurt." "I know," I said, "but being hurt isn't a plan. It's time for a plan." The moment I hung up the phone, I felt a shift inside me. The passive, grief-stricken woman who had been weeping into her pillows was gone. In her place was the designer, the problem solver, the woman who had built a business from scratch. My grief had burned away, leaving behind the cold, clear framework of resolve. I was done being a victim of their narrative. It was time to create my own. My mind, which had been a fog of anxiety, began to work with sharp, methodical precision. The core of my plan was simple: evidence. Hard, irrefutable evidence that would leave no room for their excuses, their gaslighting, their claims of my being too sensitive. They had built their case against me on a foundation of public performance. I would build my case against them on a foundation of private truth. My first thought was Margaret's doorbell camera. For the past 10 days, it had been my window to the outside world, the source of my daily dose of hope. I wondered just how much it had recorded. I sent a text to Margaret, carefully wording it. "Margaret, this might be a strange question, but I was wondering if your doorbell camera saves the video clips it records. I'm working on a little project to say thank you and thought it might be useful." Her reply came almost instantly. "Of course, dear. It saves everything to the cloud for 30 days. I can access it from my computer anytime. Let me know what you need." It was perfect, better than perfect. My next step was to organize their evidence. I propped myself up in bed, my laptop balanced on a pillow. I went to Susan's social media profile and began the painstaking process of documenting everything. I took a screenshot of every single vacation post, every photo, every video, every story. I paid close attention to the timestamps. 1:15 p.m., cocktails by the pool. 4:30 p.m., ready for our sunset dinner. 9:00 p.m., dancing the night away. I compiled them all into a folder on my desktop, labeling each one with the date and time. An ugly, vibrant mosaic of their manufactured joy. Side by side, the images told a story of relentless, deliberate fun. There wasn't a single post acknowledging their responsibilities back home. Not one missing our family or thinking of you. It was a clean, complete narrative of abandonment. Now for the counter-narrative. I texted Margaret again. Would it be too much trouble to ask if you could download the clips of you coming to my door from the past 10 days and email them to me? I promise it's for a good cause. Not a bit of trouble, Teresa, she replied. Give me about an hour. True to her word, an email landed in my inbox an hour later with a link to a shared folder. Inside were 12 video files. My heart pounded as I clicked on the first one. The video was clear, the timestamp in the corner irrefutable. There was Margaret walking up my porch steps, a covered dish in her hands. She placed it down, smiled at the camera, and walked away. The clip was only 30 seconds long, but it was powerful. I watched every single one, day after day, sometimes twice a day. Margaret bringing soup. Margaret leaving a bag of groceries David had asked her to pick up. Margaret dropping off a book she thought I'd like. The timestamps were a damning indictment of my family's neglect. While Susan was posting a picture of her snorkeling at 12:47 p.m. on Monday, Margaret was leaving a chicken salad sandwich at my door at 12:52 p.m. While Alina was sharing a video of a relaxing spa day at 2:00 p.m. on Wednesday, Margaret was dropping off a thermos of tea at 2:10 p.m. The parallel timelines were devastatingly clear. One was a story of selfish indulgence. The other was a story of selfless compassion. This was my leverage. Not a trust fund, not a legal document, but a simple human record of who showed up and who didn't. I was a graphic designer. My job was to tell stories with images, to present information in a way that was clear, compelling, and undeniable. I was going to create the most important design of my life. I opened my professional design software and created a new file. I designed a clean, elegant layout, 2 columns side by side. The left column was titled, The Vacation. The right column was titled, The Reality. For each day they were gone, I inserted a screenshot from their social media feed on the left. Beside it, on the right, I inserted a still frame from Margaret's doorbell camera video from the same day, making sure the timestamp on both images was clearly visible. The visual contrast was brutal. On the left, a colorful, sun-drenched world of leisure. On the right, the quiet, muted tones of a suburban porch, a kind woman leaving a simple meal. Left, living my best life. Right, a timestamp showing the exact moment a neighbor was making sure I didn't starve. As I worked, my anger transformed into a steely, focused calm. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. It was about reclaiming my own story from the false narrative they had created. They had tried to render me invisible, a footnote to their grand holiday. But with every click of my mouse, I was bringing the truth into sharp, undeniable focus. This document, this timeline, would be my voice. And when the time came, it would speak louder than any of their excuses ever could. The family returned 4 days later, tanned and utterly oblivious. Susan sent a breezy text to a group chat that included me and David. We're back, so exhausted, but it was worth it. Let's do a family dinner on Friday to catch up. Our treat. It was exactly the move I had anticipated. A public gesture of generosity to smooth over any lingering resentment, a way to control the narrative and re-establish their roles as the benevolent heads of the family. David wanted to refuse, but I told him to accept. Let them set the stage, I said, my voice calm. It's better that way. For the next 2 days, I finalized my presentation. I printed the 2-column timeline on high-quality paper at the largest size I could manage from my home printer, creating a series of damning pages. I felt like a lawyer preparing for a trial. My evidence was compiled, my argument was clear, and my resolve was absolute. The night of the dinner, David was a nervous wreck. "Are you sure about this, Teresa?" he asked as he helped me slowly get dressed. "It's going to be a huge fight." "It's not going to be a fight," I corrected him gently. "It's going to be a statement of fact. No yelling, no crying, just the truth." I looked at him in the mirror, my hand on my belly. "I'm doing this for her, too. I will not let her grow up in a family where this kind of behavior is considered acceptable." He nodded, his jaw set. "You're right, I'm with you, all the way." We arrived at the restaurant, a cheerful, noisy Italian place Alina had chosen. She and Susan were already at a large round table, looking radiant. They both jumped up to hug me, their movements exaggerated and performative. "Teresa, darling, you look tired," Alina said, her eyes sweeping over me with faux concern. "But it's so good to see you up and about." "The doctor allows me one short outing per week," I said, my voice neutral as David helped me into my chair. "I chose this." The small talk was excruciating. They regaled us with stories about their trip, the amazing food, the hilarious tour guide, the drama with their lost luggage. They presented us with tacky souvenirs, a bottle of rum and a t-shirt that said, "Someone who loves me went to the Caribbean, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Throughout the appetizer course, Alina controlled the conversation, artfully steering it away from the real issue. Finally, as the waiter cleared the plates, she folded her hands on the table and adopted a serious tone. "Now," she said, looking at me, "I know you were probably a little upset that we went on our trip." Susan chimed in immediately. "We felt terrible about it, Teresa, honestly. But it was non-refundable, and we just had to trust that you and David could manage for a couple of weeks." "It wasn't about managing," David started, his voice tight, but I placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "This was my moment." "Actually," I said, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through their rehearsed apologies. "I'm not upset, I'm just grateful." Alina blinked, thrown off script. "Grateful for what, dear?" "For the clarity," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of papers I had prepared, placing them in the center of the table. "I've been working on a little design project while I was on bed rest. I called it A Tale of 2 Weeks. I'd love for you to see it." I slid the first page toward them. On the left was a screenshot of Susan's Paradise Found post from the first day of their trip. On the right was a still from Margaret's doorbell camera, showing her leaving the first casserole. The timestamps were less than an hour apart. Alina stared at it, her smile frozen on her face. Susan's jaw went slack. "What is this?" Susan whispered, her voice barely audible. "This," I said, sliding the next page onto the table, "is from last Tuesday. On the left, we have your post about your stress-free spa day, Alina. And on the right, that's my neighbor Margaret, dropping off groceries for me because I couldn't leave the house." Page after page, I laid them out. A silent, damning slideshow of their vacation. The catamaran trip juxtaposed with Margaret leaving soup. The salsa dancing video next to Margaret dropping off a book. The final page was the most powerful. It showed their toast to a no-drama life, and next to it, a text from Margaret that read, "Thinking of you, dear. Let me know if you need anything at all." The silence at the table was absolute. The cheerful noise of the restaurant seemed to fade into a distant hum. Alina's face, which had been tanned and glowing, was now pale and tight. Susan was staring at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. "Where did you get these pictures?" Alina finally managed to say, her voice a low hiss. "The ones on the right." "From my neighbor's doorbell camera," I replied calmly. "She was kind enough to share the footage. She's a retired nurse, you know. She understood the severity of the situation." Susan suddenly found her voice, and it was shrill with indignation. "You're trying to make us look bad. This is an invasion of our privacy. You're twisting things. Am I? I asked, my gaze steady. Is there anything on these pages that isn't true? Did you or did you not post these pictures? And did my neighbor, a woman I barely knew 2 weeks ago, or did she not bring me food every single day while my own family, who promised to support me, didn't even call? Eleanor snatched one of the pages, her knuckles white. This is ridiculous. It was a prepaid vacation. What were we supposed to do? You're being hysterical and manipulative. Her words, which would have crushed me 2 weeks ago, now held no power. The evidence was right there on the table, a black and white shield against her gaslighting. They couldn't twist the truth when it was laid out with timestamps. Their lies and excuses shattered against the simple, visual reality of their actions. For the first time in my relationship with them, they were speechless, their carefully constructed narrative of the perfect family lying in tatters at their feet. The immediate aftermath of my reveal was a storm of panicked, desperate attempts at damage control. Eleanor, seeing that her usual tactics of dismissal and accusation weren't working against the printed evidence, shifted her strategy. Her face softened into a mask of wounded maternalism. "Teresa, I think we're all just emotional," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Pregnancy hormones are a powerful thing. You've obviously been feeling isolated and you've built this narrative in your head." Susan, quick to follow her mother's lead, chimed in, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. "We love you, Teresa. We would never intentionally hurt you. We just thought you needed space. We didn't want to be hovering and bothering you." It was a masterful performance. In the space of 30 seconds, they had recast themselves as the well-intentioned but misunderstood caregivers and me as the hormonal, irrational patient. A few weeks ago, I might have buckled under the weight of their combined emotional manipulation. I might have questioned myself, wondering if I truly was overreacting. But not anymore. "Bothering me?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "I want to be clear. Are you saying that N? Calling me, not once in 2 weeks, was your way of not bothering me." "Well, we texted," Susan said defensively. "You sent one text," David interjected, his voice like ice. He had been silent until now, watching, but he had reached his limit. "One text, Susan, and it was to tell my wife, who is on high-risk bed rest, that planning your vacation was stressful." Eleanor turned her gaze on her son, her expression one of deep betrayal. "David, how can you let her talk to us this way? We are your family. We were just trying to have a small bit of joy after a hard year." This was the core of their delusion. The belief that their desire for joy superseded everyone else's needs, especially mine. They genuinely could not comprehend that their actions had consequences beyond their own feelings. I gathered the papers on the table, my movements slow and deliberate. "This isn't a discussion," I said, looking directly at Eleanor. "And it's not a negotiation. This is information. What you choose to do with it is up to you. But what I do and who I allow around my child is up to me." With that, David helped me to my feet, and we walked out of the restaurant, leaving them sitting in stunned silence with their half-eaten meals and the ghosts of their excuses. The next few days were a tense Cold War. Eleanor and Susan began a campaign to win David back to their side. They bombarded him with calls and texts filled with accusations against me. They claimed I was poisoning him against them, that I was dramatic and unstable, and that I was trying to isolate him from his family. To his credit, David held firm. The visual evidence had been a turning point for him. He had always known his mother and sister could be selfish, but seeing their neglect laid out so starkly next to Margaret's kindness had severed some final cord of denial. "They just don't get it," he said to me one evening, rubbing his temples. "Mom genuinely believes she is the victim here. She said you embarrassed her on purpose." "I didn't need to embarrass her," I replied. "I just showed her a mirror." Meanwhile, my bond with Margaret deepened. Knowing the full story now, she became even more of a fixture in my life. She'd come over in the afternoons and sit with me at a safe distance, telling me stories about her years as a nurse or about raising her own children. She was a well of calm, practical wisdom. During one of our chats, she told me about her own daughter who lived across the country. She had a rough first pregnancy, too, Margaret said, her expression soft with memory. I flew out there and stayed for a month, slept on her couch. It's what you do, you show up. Her words resonated deep within me. It's what you do, you show up. The final piece of my case, the irrefutable proof that would end all debate, came from Margaret herself. She had been helping me sort through the mountain of baby gifts that had been delivered. Among them was an expensive, top-of-the-line baby monitoring system. "Oh, this is from Alina and Susan," I said, reading the card. "It arrived while they were away," the card read. "For our precious grandchild. We can't wait to be the best grand matriarch and auntie in the world. Love, Mom and Susan." Margaret picked up the gift receipt that had fallen out of the box. She frowned slightly. "That's odd," she said. "What is it?" "This was purchased online," she said, pointing to the date on the receipt. "Look at the timestamp." I looked. The gift had been ordered at 11:30 p.m. on the Friday night of our disastrous dinner, nearly 3 hours after David and I had walked out. It wasn't a pre-vacation gift at all. It was a panicked, reactionary purchase. It was a desperate attempt to buy their way back into our good graces, to create the illusion that they had been thinking of us all along. This was it, the final, damning piece of evidence. Their supposed love and excitement for the baby was just as performative as their concern for me had been. It wasn't a gift of love, it was a bribe. I took a photo of the receipt, the timestamp glowing like a confession. The second confrontation was coming. This time, there would be no room for misinterpretation. I would present them with proof not just of their neglect, but of their premeditated deceit. The spell of the caring family would not just be broken, it would be vaporized. 2 weeks later, Alina made her move. She called David and announced, in a tone that brooked no argument, that she was hosting a baby shower for me. It wasn't a question or a request, it was a royal decree. "It will be next Sunday," she declared. "Just a small gathering. Family and a few of my close friends. It's time we put all this unpleasantness behind us and focus on the baby." It was a strategic masterpiece of manipulation. By hosting a baby shower, she was publicly reasserting her role as the doting grandmother. She was creating a stage on which she could perform her love and generosity, or an audience. Refusing to attend would make me look petty and unforgiving. Attending would mean tacitly accepting her narrative that the unpleasantness was over and that all was forgiven. "We have to go, don't we?" David asked, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "If we don't, she'll tell everyone we're alienating her from her grandchild." "Oh, we're going," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "She's provided the perfect venue, an audience, a celebration, a stage. I wouldn't miss it for the world." The day of the shower was bright and sunny. The event was held in Alina's immaculate backyard, which was decorated with an almost aggressive amount of pastel balloons and streamers. About 20 women were there, Alina's friends, a few distant relatives. It was her home turf, filled with her allies. As David carefully helped me to a large, comfortable chair that had clearly been designated as my throne, I could feel their eyes on me, a mixture of pity and judgment. I knew the story they had been told, the one about the difficult, hormonal daughter-in-law. Alina was in her element, flitting from guest to guest, accepting compliments on the decor and the tiny, perfect cucumber sandwiches. Susan was her loyal lieutenant, directing people to the gift table, which was already piled high. After about an hour of strained conversation, Alina clinked a spoon against a glass of lemonade, calling for everyone's attention. "I just want to thank you all for coming to celebrate Teresa and my future grandbaby," she began, beaming at the crowd. "As the matriarch of this family, nothing is more important to me than welcoming a new generation. We've had our little ups and downs, as all families do, but today is about love and new beginnings." She then gestured to the gift table. "And speaking of love, Susan and I were so excited to get the baby the very best. We bought them a state-of-the-art monitoring system because the safety and security of our grandchild is our #1 priority. It always has been. This was my cue. As Susan went to retrieve the large, beautifully wrapped box, I cleared my throat. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the polite applause. "That's so incredibly generous, Eleanor. Thank you." She smiled, preening. "Of course, dear, only the best for you." I was so surprised when it arrived, I continued, my voice even and calm. "Especially since you ordered it so late at night." The smile on Eleanor's face faltered. "I'm sorry." "The monitor," I said, looking around at the assembled guests. "You bought it at 11:30 p.m. on the night we all had dinner together a few weeks ago. You must have been thinking of the baby right after you got home. That's so thoughtful." A confused murmur went through the crowd. Susan, who was holding the gift, froze mid-step. Eleanor's face went from pale to ghostly white. I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet. I had prepared a small digital slideshow. "In fact," I said, "your dedication has been on my mind so much, I made a little something to say thank you. A tribute to the family's true priorities." I pressed a button, and the tablet screen connected to the large smart TV Eleanor had on her patio. The first image that flashed up was the 2-column document, "The Vacation versus the Reality." The gasps from the guests were audible. "On the left," I narrated, my voice as steady as a news anchor's, "you'll see my mother-in-law and sister-in-law enjoying their well-deserved, non-refundable vacation. On the right, you'll see my neighbor Margaret, a retired nurse, bringing me lunch on the same day because I was on strict bed rest and couldn't feed myself." I clicked to the next slide, showing a different day, and the next. I spoke calmly, without malice, simply stating the facts presented on the screen. The patio was dead silent except for my voice. Eleanor looked as if she had been turned to stone. Susan looked like she was about to be sick. Then I brought up the final slide. It was a high-resolution image of the gift receipt for the baby monitor, the timestamp circled in bright red. "And this," I said, "is the receipt for the wonderful gift we're celebrating today. Purchased 3 hours after I showed my family this timeline at the restaurant. It wasn't a gift of foresight or love. It was a gift of damage control." I turned off the screen and looked directly at Eleanor. Her friends were staring at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Her perfect image, the one she had cultivated for decades, had been systematically dismantled in front of her entire social circle. "I don't need expensive gifts, Eleanor," I said, my voice softening slightly. "I just needed you to show up. A phone call, a bowl of soup. That's what family does." Suddenly, David's father, who had been silent all afternoon, stood up. He walked over to the gift table, picked up the baby monitor, and handed it to David. Then he turned to his wife. "Eleanor," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "I think you owe your son and his wife an apology, a real one." But Eleanor couldn't speak. She was cornered, exposed, with no narrative left to hide behind. Susan burst into tears and fled into the house. In that moment, watching the matriarch of the family utterly defeated by nothing more than the simple, unvarnished truth, I felt a profound sense of peace. David came to my side, squeezed my hand, and helped me stand. The power dynamic had shifted, permanently. We were no longer characters in her play. We were the authors of our own story. The fallout from the baby shower was immediate and decisive. Eleanor's carefully curated world of social prestige crumbled. Her friends, having witnessed the raw, documented proof of her neglect, could no longer see her as the benevolent family matriarch. The story of the dueling timelines spread through their circle like wildfire. For a woman whose entire identity was built on public perception, the humiliation was a far greater punishment than any angry words from me could ever have been. She and Susan did not apologize. Their pride wouldn't allow it. Instead, they retreated into a stony, resentful silence, cutting off contact with us completely. For them, we were the source of their shame, not the victims of their actions. The silence was, frankly, a relief. It was a quiet, clean space where David and I could finally breathe and focus on what truly mattered. 5 weeks later, our daughter, Lily, was born. She was small but perfectly healthy. Holding her for the first time, I felt a wave of love so fierce and protective it erased all the lingering bitterness and hurt. My world, which had shrunk to the four walls of my living room, had now expanded to encompass this tiny, miraculous person. Margaret was one of our first visitors at the hospital. She arrived not with balloons or a giant teddy bear, but with a thermos of chicken broth for me and a hand-knitted blanket for Lily. She held the baby with the practiced ease of a woman who had swaddled hundreds of infants in her nursing career, her eyes shining with genuine joy. "She's beautiful, Teresa," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." A few months later, on a warm autumn afternoon, we held a small naming ceremony for Lily in our backyard. The guest list was small and carefully chosen, a few of our close friends, my father and Margaret. We didn't invite David's family. There had been no contact, no remorse, and I was done extending olive branches that would only be set on fire. During the ceremony, David stood up, holding Lily in his arms. "There's one person here today we'd like to honor," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at Margaret. "Family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up. It's about who offers kindness with no expectation of anything in return. Margaret, you were our angel during the darkest time. You showed us what true family looks like." Then he looked at me and said, "That's why we've decided on Lily's middle name. Her name is Lily Margaret." Margaret gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as tears streamed down her face. She was, for the first time since I'd known her, speechless. The love in that backyard felt more real and more powerful than any of the hollow, performative affection I had ever received from my in-laws. We had created our own family, built on a foundation of genuine care and mutual respect. Margaret became Lily's honorary grandmother in every sense of the word, a constant, loving presence in her life. About a year later, David received a stilted, formal letter from his father. He wrote that a leaner was in therapy and that Susan had moved to a different city. He spoke of regret and a difficult year of reflection. He asked if, perhaps, they could see their granddaughter. David and I discussed it at length. We decided to send a single photograph of Lily smiling in Margaret's arms. On the back, I wrote a simple message: "She is happy and she is loved. That is all that matters." Perhaps one day you will understand what that truly means. The door is not locked, but you will have to find the key yourselves. It is called humility. We never received a direct reply, but it felt like the right and final word. My journey through betrayal and isolation had led me to an unexpected truth. The family you choose can be more powerful than the family you are given. My home was no longer a place of silence and loneliness. It was filled with the laughter of my daughter, the warmth of my husband's love, and the steadfast kindness of a neighbor who became a grandmother. I had faced the storm and emerged not just intact, but stronger, with a clearer vision of what truly constitutes a family. And in the end, that was a gift more precious than any other.